The idea of a challenger is even large companies can be challengers, even small companies can be challengers. What's really interesting about both of these stories is the very strong challenger mindset that the founders had. The one trap companies fall into is saying, oh, I will be lower price. To me, I think a lot of founders miss the whole brand love aspect and the true customer delight aspect. We all want to have brands in our lives that we do have a slightly stronger connection with.
Hi, I'm Romit at Lightspeed, and I'm very excited to host Vivek for the first edition of Lunchbreak with Lightspeed, where I dive deep into a particular thematic area with compelling personalities in the ecosystem. Vivek, I wanted to chat with you about challenger brands, creating the challenger brand playbook, and I could not think of anyone better. Of course, you're with Lightspeed. You've seen multiple journeys with mamaearth and Boat, where you were also the CEO previously, and you were the CEO and MD at Godrej Consumer Public Limited, which is what $20 billion today. You have seen these journeys both as a part of a large organization as well as startups, and I'm excited to chat with you about it. Vivek, when I think about the challenger playbook, to me it seems like somebody who does not follow the conventional playbook that exists out there. So they sort of can go head up against the incumbents, or can be incumbents themselves, who connect with customers on a different level because of the way they do things differently. And they sort of end up appending the rules of the industry itself. Would you agree with that definition of a challenger? Typically,
it's this David and Goliath story or someone being an underdog. But I think to me, being a challenger is much more about a mindset. It is about someone who really has the boldness of ambition to be able to really shake up the status quo. And they have this strong belief that they have something in their arsenal which can actually unseat much larger players. So the idea of a challenger is even large companies can be challengers, even small companies can be challengers. The key is to really have this mindset and this conviction and boldness more than anything else.
Yeah, I like that framing because it's underappreciated how much large companies innovate themselves. So let's talk about that. I was stalking you on LinkedIn, and you became the CEO of Godrej Consumer in 2013, if I'm correct. Yeah. Take us back there, 2013. What is the state of GCPL like? What were the strategic priorities of the company then?
Yeah. Before I took over the role at GCPL, I had been fortunate enough to be actually working with the group for about 4 years or so. Okay. So I had a fairly good inside peek in terms of how the group was operating and some of the priorities and challenges for GCPL. Mm. Like any incumbent, most incumbents actually start facing periods of stall out, and GCPL was no different. Mm. This was part of a group that had been around for decades. With very, very, very attractive brands in some ways. But growth had been stalling. Profitability had been under pressure. The company was fairly fragmented in terms of having tried lots of different things. But the good thing was that the brands were still very strong. And we also had the next generation who had gotten more involved in the business with Nisa Godrej, who was very keen to make their mark in the business. And so when I joined, the inside joke was that this was a company whose culture was satisfactory underperformance. And so part of the approach was, how do you build on the strengths the company had inherently at its disposal, but try and find a way to be able to now kickstart growth again.
But there's almost a need for that large incumbent to itself become a challenger. Give us a few anecdotes, right? Like, it has iconic brands like Goodnight and whatnot under its portfolio. How do massive brands like these end up becoming challengers?
So there are two ways to do it. One is to be able to internally transform. The other is to find a way to bring in acquisitions. So Goodnight was actually an acquisition. And, Mr. Adi Godrej had the wherewithal about recognizing how big of a problem mosquitoes can become to people's lives. and he was very opportunistic in terms of acquiring Goodnight. So that was one approach, which is, when you want to be a challenger, sometimes you need an external catalyst, and an acquisition can be a great way to be able to, get both scale and transform internally. The second example I can think of is, the hair color category. Godrej had been a market leader in hair color powders. The powder format products were about 5 to 10 rupees in size. The sachets,
correct,
right?
Yeah, yeah.
At the same time, you had a more contemporary format called the creme format, which is largely, creams and developers in tubes. And L'Oreal was by far the market leader in the cream format, but it was very small in India. But creams were the de facto format in the rest of the world. And L'Oreal is the market leader in pretty much almost most countries in the world. And for Godrej, the big worry was that as consumers have more disposable income, what is the risk of people actually upgrading from powders to the cream format? The interesting challenge was that while powders were, say, at about 10 rupees, the cream was actually a 150 rupee product. So the price gap between tubes and with powders was significantly high. So Godrej innovated and created one of the first sachet-based hair color in a cream format in sachets. And typically with hair colors in creams, you had to know there's a developer and a colorant, and you had to keep on finding ways to mix it to get the ideal color. This was in 2 pre-measured sachets. So a very innovative product in a very innovative format, and the price point was 30 rupees. So you can imagine for a 10 rupee consumer, a 30 rupee upgrade was far more palatable than going to 150 rupee price point. This product became a huge success, and L'Oreal was forced to respond, and I think India was the first country in the world where L'Oreal actually had to launch a sachet format for cream. So in some ways, being able to follow the customer as opposed to trying to go after a totally different set of customers generally is a better approach as one thinks about a growth playbook.
I like that framing a lot, like follow the customer. Maybe any other large brands where you executed that playbook and you saw the results of that?
So probably the biggest disruptor in FMCG over the last 20 years or so has been Patanjali, right? Correct, at least when Patanjali started off, and obviously they had their own internal challenges to cope up with how to best scale up. But that by far was the biggest disruption you saw in terms of somebody creating a totally new category in some ways based on the Ayurvedic benefit. Mamaearth has done that in terms of naturals. But the other way you've seen disruption happening has been largely whether you look at detergents, from powder to liquid, has been a big disruption. In soaps, you have seen disruption from bar soaps to body washes and hand washes. So companies come up with new formats, they find new benefits, and that's how the entire approach of the growth playbook keeps on manifesting itself.
One thing that struck me as you were saying that was the innovation in, I guess, early FMCG era of, I suppose, organized products was that you lowered the price point dramatically. You got a 1 rupee sachet shampoo, you launched a hair powder that was 5-10 rupees, right? Cheap for the customer. And it seems today that the path of evolution or the arc of innovation is on product form factor that allows you to charge a premium for it.
Across most categories in FMCG, right, the amount of the unorganized or the unbranded segment can be anywhere from 30 to 50%. And so if you're looking at rural growth, if you're looking at acquiring first-time subscribers or consumers, you have to have very strong entry-level price points.
Right.
So I think the interesting part about India is this hexagonal pyramid of consumption, right? Whereas certainly brands, to attract new customers in, if you want to play the penetration game, you have to have affordable price points in India, just given the GDP per capita in India. At the same time, it's important to upgrade consumers with more premium products. But at the same time, it's important to ensure that you have enough products that drive penetration as well.
That brings me to my second question. If you have that sort of a broad portfolio across price point, how do you connect with the customer whose levels of affluence, levels of aspiration, and frankly, levels of expectation with the product itself might be different?
Correct. This, in many ways, is the biggest challenge brand marketers face, which is what is your brand promise and how do you actually appeal to different kinds of segments. So some companies actually end up creating sub-brands or totally different kinds of new brands as well, right?
Yes.
The hard part for most companies is to be able to straddle the brand equity across all the various kinds of price points. And typically, Romit, what you find is that it's far easier for companies to move south and create more affordable formats than for companies to be able to move north. So for example,
But incidentally, you did exactly that with the hair.
Godrej was late in the game. A new format emerged, hair color shampoos. And typically these are, every single new opportunity is a bit of a niche. So do you think it's small enough and will it get big enough is always a bit of a challenge. But Godrej was late in the game where more nimble players came in and created this hair color shampoo format. Along with that, we tried for a long time to become more premium in terms of more premium products, more hairstyling products, but the brand could not have traveled as high as that. So we decided to create a separate brand, Be Blunt.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, not enough attention was paid to Be Blunt, which ultimately mamaearth actually ended up acquiring.
So then your advice would be to almost, if you can, go premium, easier to go south versus go north in pricing.
I think it's just typically much, much harder because the kind of capability required and the marketing mix required for a premium strategy tends to be very, very different.
Yeah. Well, then maybe shifting gears a little bit, because you worked so closely with both mamaearth and boat, and both of them to me are examples of how two very different playbooks have led to large outcomes.
Romit, what's really interesting about both of these stories is the very strong challenger mindset that the founders had. And they were obsessed about being clear about what they were challenging, not who they were challenging. So the playbook actually had to be very different, whereas both focused far more on celebrities and influencers with good quality products, but at much more affordable prices. I think mamaearth decided to go in with a mid-prestige kind of pricing segment where the prices were at a premium versus much more cheaper products.
Correct.
And mamaearth focused far more on a much more rigorous marketing playbook to really be able to work to get the ROI on the marketing correct. Strategically also, both went deep with the boat brand and created soundbars, power banks, cables along with headphones, but all of them were within the boat brand. mamaearth did not really want to necessarily have to start thinking about bringing prices down. Affordability has always been good with mamaearth for a certain segment, but rather than start going into very mass pricing, mamaearth chose to actually have a house of brands approach. But inherently with both the founders was a very strong conviction that there was something missing in the way customers were being served today, and there was an opportunity to challenge the legacy mindset.
Yeah. I think the other angle that has really stood out to me with both of them is that while you're right, mamaearth is more prestige pricing and boat is perhaps lower, but both of them have sold aspiration to their TG in their own way. How important is that to sort of break through the clutter almost in a way and create that unique identity, voice, and visual side of your own?
See, at the end of the day, if someone is competing only on the basis of price, there's always somebody else who can come in and perhaps charge a lower price than you do. Unless you believe that you have some unique magic formula that allows you to be a lower cost player than somebody else. Right? People can be low price, but being low cost is very, very difficult in these industries where the materials and the ingredients are fairly similar across players. And so the one trap companies fall into is saying, oh, I will be lower price. But if you're lower price, but if your costs are not lower, you will be making lower margin. If you make lower margin, you will not be able to invest in being able on innovation or brand building, and ultimately the business will end up suffering. So I think that part, what a lot of these players have done is to be able to have a very good sense of what consumer willingness to pay is and actually start building some of the emotive components into a brand. You know, why would someone actually want to connect with your brand? How do you engage with them better? So to me, I think a lot of founders miss the whole brand love aspect and the true customer delight aspect while focusing too much on the product. Look, the product is very important. The product has to be the starting point. But ultimately, we all want to, you know, have brands in our lives that we do have a slightly stronger connection with.
Yeah, you know, actually that's so well put. Recently, I've been hooked onto this YouTube channel. It's by the folks who run the Pizza Bakery and Paris Panini in Bangalore. And they decided that there's a gap in creating a new burger joint in Bangalore because the burgers in Bangalore are not good enough. And they have documented every aspect of this journey, right from tasting all the burgers in Bangalore to finding a location for a new burger shop. And that's led to these people who have been following that founder's journey week after week as he posts an update and essentially being extremely invested in it. You know, there are comments like, oh, I can't wait for your burger brand to open. You know, I've seen this getting built in front of my eyes. And I think what you said is such a powerful illustration. How do you build that brand story? What makes people connect with you? And I think that's absolutely important. One company that you work with in Lightspeed portfolio that I'm always fascinated by is magicpin. Magicpin is riding the waves of ONDC and sort of also doing food delivery. It is clearly a challenger in that space, right? What do you think it needs to get right to be able to build a successful outcome given that?
No, I think magicpin is a company that we're all very excited about. The company started off by basically enabling offline retailers to be able to attract more customers. So it's a very analytically ROI-driven channel for consumers to discover and increase traffic and acquisition in offline stores. So given that 90% of India still is offline, magicpin probably is one of the best companies that I have seen in terms of truly enabling online to offline commerce in many ways and providing consumers with some great benefits. But through the journey as magicpin began working on this online to offline commerce transformation, they've developed some very strong capabilities in delivery and logistics. And Romit, a lot of times we underestimate the power of timing, right? So people today are very used to Swiggy and Zomato in terms of food delivery. There are significant opportunities to disintermediate that value chain. And over time, magicpin has been able to develop some very deep capabilities in delivery and logistics. So in some ways, it's a question of timing. It's also about the opportunity. And it's also about capabilities and right to win. I think all of these three things have to come together to be able to create opportunities like this sort.
Final question on this. As a challenger brand, what is your advice to founders on thinking through growth versus profitability?
The practical reality at the end of the day is founders need capital, right? So the answer a little bit depends honestly on how much cash is there in the bank. How much runway do you have? Because you can flex both growth and profitability, and both are important. But a little bit of the prioritization depends honestly on how much, runway do you have. If you have 3 or 4 years of runway, it's very important to focus on growth. Otherwise, I think profitability also becomes very important. And I would break this apart in terms of stages. And so if you're a seed A company, at that point, it's all about customer acquisition. Once you've gotten PM of product market fit nailed. And at that stage, if you have enough cash, it's important to grow 3 to 5x versus the industry growth rates, because you will not get funding in the next round if you can't show growth. You have to get enough comfort that the unit economics are going to be scalable. That's in a seed stage A kind of a company. Series B and C, I think what I look for far more at that stage is a drive towards CM2, as we call it, right? And looking far deeper at cohort level profitability.
And CM2, when you say it's net of customer acquisition, everything, and
So,
only thing below that is your EBITDA and like corporate level cost, essentially.
What is my cohort level profitability?
Yes.
And how scalable would that cohort level profitability be as we grow larger? To me, that's the second part of this equation. Then Series D, E, and towards IPO, we start looking at operating leverage. Are you getting enough leverage on SG&A? And therefore, what does your EBITDA look like? And by EBITDA, I personally recommend looking at pure EBITDA, not adjusted EBITDA with 3 or 4 asterisks or stars.
Yep, you're giving the industry secret away.
Right? So I think it's important to be at least honest in terms of, what truly is going to be scalable. So I think the important thing is that every stage, profitability has to be important. Whether it's unit economics first, second is your acquisition efficiency, the third is your operating leverage. And while you're doing this, it's important to keep the growth funnel going. So it's not an easy answer. It's not one versus the other. It's the hardest tightrope any founder has to be able to walk. But it's very good to keep on asking yourself the right questions on how do you find the balance between scale and the right measure of profitability.
Vivek, this has been a masterclass. I certainly know that you keep a lot of Lightspeed founders honest by asking those hard and important questions. We have covered a lot today, and I'm sure this would lead to some conversations. For folks who do want to reach out to Vivek, he's with Lightspeed, and feel free to ping him. Always a helpful person. You'll find him on panels and talking about many startup journeys. Vivek, thank you for giving us
Thank
the
you,
time.
Romit. Always a pleasure.